Hi, I'm Chloe.
And I'm Bez.
And this podcast is for graduate teachers in their first 5 years.
We share our own teaching stories as well as advice and ideas we wish we'd had as graduate teachers.
Sometimes funny, sometimes horrifying, but always true.
We want you to thrive and love teaching beyond the dreaded 5-year cliff. Hi, I'm Bez, maths and science teacher, and my go-to coffee order is an almond latte.
Ooh, almonds.
Yeah.
That's controversial. I don't know how I feel about almond milk.
Ooh, okay.
In coffee. I'm Chloe, your maths and science teacher also, but someone who, doesn't love an almond in my coffee.
Just one almond.
Just no almonds in my coffee, please. No, my coffee order would have previously been a skinny latte, but is now an oat latte because I like the oat in my coffee.
Oat milk is very creamy.
It is. It tastes so good.
I wonder if anyone actually has a coffee order of normal milk anymore.
My dad. Loves normal milk. Full cream.
That sounds weird to order full cream.
I know. Every time I hear full cream, I think of that ad where it's like that 2% extra dollop. Like that's what goes
the
through
milk ad.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But coffee aside.
Yes.
Even though it's in my hand right now, today we are going to come back to a topic that we think is pretty important given this time of year. We're heading into report writing season. And assessment is on everyone's brains.
Indeed.
So today we are going to come back and look at summative assessment and how to make sure that you can get ready for the report writing period.
Absolutely.
Before we do so, it might be nice for us to just, have a little chat about, okay, well, we've spoken about formative assessment. What's formative versus summative assessment? How would we unpack that for some of our newer teachers?
I always remember summative assessment as the sum.
Oh my gosh, you've said that before. Yeah, we've had this conversation.
But I literally have to, every single time, formative versus summative, I have to go through that whole verbal talk in my head.
Yeah.
To remember formative versus summative.
And I like that for anyone who's interested, Bez is doing some fabulous hand actions. Whenever she says the sum, she's kind of like making big hands, like it's the whole thing in a round circle, and I love it.
But you had a good way to remember formative assessments.
Yeah, what did I say? Oh, you're forming things.
Yes, that's it. Which is a great one because I never had one.
Part of the process.
Yes.
Yeah, you're forming the learning.
Yeah, so summative assessments, obviously they're important because then you're gauging a student's understanding on the entirety of a topic. But then formative assessments are important along the way, so you're able to intervene more frequently before you get to the end of the topic, really.
Yeah. And so, I think historically the focus has been on, okay, we just need to do summative assessment to prove that someone's learned something. But without those check-ins along the way, you don't really know how to adjust the learning process for your learners. And without doing anything in the beginning, you don't really have anything to compare it to.
Yes.
You're kind of just going, oh, this is the curriculum. Yes, you meet it. No, you don't. We'll put you against whatever Oswell's level and blah, 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 Bob's your uncle. But learning is a lot more than that.
Yes.
Having said that, report writing period is about making sure that you get all of that summative assessment done and it's reported on. Yep. And that's a legal requirement, and schools will be doing semesterly reports. And they can vary widely.
Yes. I fortunately have never been at a school where we've had to put comments. So I'm very thankful for that because I have heard stories from friends how time-consuming comments can take. We did do comments for formative assessment tasks, so it was meant to be continuous reporting so that by the time we did, end of semester reports, technically there should have been no surprises. Yeah.
I was not so fortunate, Bess.
Oh, no.
In my first year of teaching, I was at a school that was still doing comments at the time, and then they sort of changed it the following year to, instead of a full couple of paragraphs of comments that turn to areas of improvement that you would just dot point for each student. But yeah, I can say that comments can be painful. And I don't think it's not because you don't have feedback to give or that you're struggling to find things to write. It's simply because you might be teaching 6 classes times, 25 to 29 kids, depending on what sector you're working in. And that's a lot of comments to write. That's a lot of reports to write.
High volume.
And yeah, it's really high volume. And, a lot of times you're giving feedback on those tasks that you're still finishing off in those final couple of weeks of term prior to your report writing due date. So it's not like you can start them super early. Like you can, but obviously schools will open them at a certain time depending on what program you're using. And then you've got to make sure that you've got the tasks completed and that you've then marked them to then incorporate your feedback on them.
Yes.
So I remember for me, previously Queen's birthday, now King's birthday, used to be that weekend of the year that I would absolutely dread because I knew that was marking weekend for me, because the way that my school structured the assessment cycle was you were getting all your assessments in just before that weekend, and the report writing was not far off.
No.
So
it was crunch time.
It was crunch time, yeah. I remember there was one weekend I was there were some tears that weekend.
Oh.
Yeah. I was teaching 3 Year 9 maths classes that year, and for some reason, I don't know why, but in the maths team, we decided that like a 36-page maths exam was a really good idea for these Year 9s.
Wow.
Don't know why. Got to say, it was very rigorous. Like, we really challenged the students and pushed them, and like their learning was great. But marking that 36-page exam alongside their other assessments, when I had 3 classes of them to mark, it was like never ending. Like I remember just sitting on the couch like doing, okay, I'm going to mark a page at a time so that I'm really consistent in my marking. Like maths marking's pretty straightforward, but it just, I didn't think it was going to end.
Ending.
It was never going to end.
Exactly.
There were many tears shed.
Oh, gosh.
Many tears shed.
I feel like when it comes to summative assessments and report writing, at some point in your teaching life, there will be tears or multiple tears. My first year teaching Year 12 biology,
Yep.
the students had finished their first summative assessment for the year, and I was like fresh, so feeling excited about it.
Like, yeah, I love that like little bit of excitement you get when you're like, oh, I want to see how they went.
Yes. And then I got to the end of marking the assessments, and I think only 2 students in my class had passed. Oh. So I called my mentor up on the drive home and was like,
I'm the worst teacher.
I'm the worst teacher. I was like, they haven't learned a thing from me. I was like, they've all failed. And her response was amazing. She was like, no. She's like, that is a great experience. And she's like, there's
I thought she was going to say, that was a great outcome. You're like, no, it's not.
No, she was like, that's a great experience. She's like, there's a lot of things we can do then after marking these formative assessments. So that did make me feel a lot more hopeful.
Yeah, there's things that we can review for them, for us.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a nice way to look at it.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, like, in terms of these crunch moments, crunch time, stress time, that dreaded King's/Queen's Day weekend, do you think that a lot of that stress comes down to mismanagement of time?
Ooh, as in our mismanagement of time?
¿Por qué no los dos?
Oh.
Could be ours, could be school mismanagement. I don't know. Like, I have my own thoughts. Keen to hear yours.
I dare say, like, not ours. I feel like we're very, like, I think sometimes the, depending on the school, like the way that the timelines run for like when reports have to be in and when your final assessments have to be in, they can be very close to each other. So that can makes it very difficult then. Like, I don't know how you can manage your time any better if those are the timelines that have been...
that you have to work within.
Provided, to you. What's your thoughts?
I wouldn't say controversial. Look, I agree with you. I do think that a lot of it does come down to the natural school cycles that we work within and what's normalised within teaching. Although I feel like I'm about to open a big can of worms about.
Here we go. Open it.
I don't know if I should. How do I phrase this? So
I can see you're thinking very carefully.
I am. No, you know what? My brother-in-law is a teacher and he's a deputy principal. And I was having some conversations with him about, you know, the stress that teaching brings and timelines and those periods where you do have to work more additional hours than you would normally, like during report writing season or exam marking season or whatever it is. And I remember his take on this, and he's been teaching for a really long time, and he's an incredible operator, really respect him. And he was like, yeah, but he's like, you got to remember, Chloe, like, we get so many weeks off in the year, like it makes sense for us to be working slightly longer hours during certain parts of the year. And I was kind of like, you know what, like that's kind of a fair assessment, but I also still work on the holidays.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like,
yeah.
Still marking, still planning.
Yeah, so I don't know, like I still think that part of my thought is like, okay, I understand that there's going to be some additional times where there is going to be an increased workload. That's okay with me. Like I went into teaching knowing that. What I wasn't prepared for is for the quality of, you know, the work that I ended up producing to be compromised because of that time stress.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, like I'm happy to do the additional hours, but it gets to a point where like, you know, with something like, and I know a lot of schools are sort of moving away from doing long comments, maybe some aren't, but the way that schools would manage that was to have comment banks. And to me, I always felt like comment banks were a bit of a weird thing to have because they're very generic comments.
Yeah.
To me, I'm like, well, that's not a personalised reflection of that student's progress and learning.
Yeah, and how they can actually improve.
Yeah, in which case, why continue to do them? Which is why I think a lot of schools have moved away from it and maybe have looked at, okay, let's focus on, you know, areas of improvement and we'll work on continuous reporting as a means of giving feedback, which I'm totally on board with and I think works much better. But yeah, I don't know. I know for myself, I can say there have been instances where maybe I wasn't completely aware of the time pressure that was creeping up on me because I was new to those experiences.
Yes.
I'd never done exam marking. I didn't know how long it was going to take. I didn't really know what the reporting deadlines would be like or how long they would take me. So it's kind of hard for you to manage your work life and your personal life without knowing what the time sync's going to be like.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. It could be a bit of both, but I think systems can definitely be improved.
But even with like the time management as well, I don't know if you have any tips. I found one thing. It just meant you had to be like quite proactive as well then, is when you were putting together a summative assessment task to have the entire marking guide
100%.
ready and completed. And just even small things like, for example, I think this probably would have been halfway through my teaching career. Someone showed me like multiple choice, getting students to do it on a multiple choice sheet, and then
she would quicker to mark.
She would photocopy that multiple choice sheet, fill in the correct answers, and then would actually punch holes in it. And so you lay it on top of the multiple choice sheet, and if it's not filled in,
clever.
you have a highlighter and you just highlight the correct answer.
Oh my God.
So that's one tip.
That's
that's
life-changing. Why did I
is.
never do that? Like, I always did the sheet.
The sheet is
But then
helpful.
I'd just be looking at the two sheets like, okay, question 1, question 2. Like,
overlay it on top,
overlay.
color it in. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Did you have any, like, helpful time management tips with summative assessments?
In terms of writing them, marking them, anything.
The whole process.
I definitely think, look, I agree with you. The marking guide's super important. There were times where I was working in teams where we'd create an assessment and we didn't make the marking guide, and we'd kind of discuss it after we'd all gone and marked things, and then we'd come back to moderate.
Yeah.
And that, I think, takes a lot longer. I think having those discussions beforehand is also much better because there's less bias when you're marking your students' work.
Totally agree.
So I think that's a very important thing to consider, particularly when you're teaching seniors. You don't want to be biased in marking their work. You're not setting them up for success that way. I also think just making sure that, like, if you are a procrastinator, that you set your week up with specific times where you're like, I'm blocking this out specific for marking.
I love time blocking.
Yeah, time blocking is really important. And look, you do get extras and things sometimes depending on your allotment. But if you have a couple of times throughout the week and you're like, okay, I'm just going to do 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, you're kind of chipping away at it without realising.
Yeah.
Something that I used to like doing is that I'd come into work a little bit early. So it might be like 45 minutes early, and I'd go through my emails, and then I'd be like, okay, 30 minutes marking.
Yeah.
And my brain was fresh, start of the day, done.
Yeah.
Other times I might be like, okay, we're going to have a little marking party after school for half an hour. If it was projects, it might have been more than half an hour.
Yeah.
But it kind of prevents you from like lugging all that stuff home and the hours sort of accumulating.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden now you're still stuck with 50 assessments that you still need to mark. Yeah,
work with the time that you got.
Yeah, and I really like the morning one, like when you're fresh and you're like switched on, you've just had a coffee.
And it's quiet.
Yeah, that's such a great time. And I actually would, a bit controversial maybe, I used to start on the short answer first because I always knew multiple choice, it's easier comparable to the short answer. So it was just a nice way to finish things off, you know? It was just like
I've done the hard bit already.
Yeah, exactly.
Got the easy thing left.
Exactly. And then you're just like, oh, you just finish on a nice note.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. I guess something to talk about is what are the different types of summative assessments that can be created? I feel like a very common error is only making or creating tests, which I think we have moved away from quite a bit now.
Yeah.
But I think it would be helpful if we were to talk about the types of summative assessments that we can create.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, we'll kind of put the senior year 11 and 12 classes aside because there will be certain assessment types that you must give those students. So we'll talk sort of 7 to 10. I know for the maths and science space, tests have been done to overdone.
Yes.
I used to like considering, okay, well, we know that there's research tasks and there's like collaborative projects and, you know, there's research investigations, whether you're doing prac work and that kind of thing. But what other ways can we allow students to be a bit more creative with their work? So even something as simple as like a storyboard or a comic strip, things that are hands-on, like models, can be really interesting. One project that I ran with some of my junior students was around body systems and pollution, and then how pollution can impact the human body. And then they had to make like a campaign.
Oh, I love that.
And they could present their campaign however they wanted. So it could have been like a billboard or a brochure, or like they could have created their own marketing materials. And I had students who made their own ad, which was really cool.
That.
And I think as long as you have really clear assessment guidelines, whether you're using a rubric, a developmental rubric, or you've got you just need to make sure that marking scheme is very clear.
Yes.
Students love having creative freedom.
Yeah.
But sometimes that creative freedom means that they want to just like run with an idea, which is fantastic, but they need to think about, okay, well, how am I actually going to demonstrate my learning?
Yes.
How do I link it back and make sure that I've done X, Y, Z? So incorporating opportunities for them to come back and, okay, I'm going to check against my rubric. Have I done ... Help them to reflect a little bit more readily and then work within their creative bubbles.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, the point that you raised. Like, regardless of what type of summative assessment you're making, having that criteria or that rubric really clearly defined before you start it with a class and actually explaining to them, like, this is how it works is so important because you give them that autonomy.
Having samples to show them as well. Like, here's some past work that were, fantastic samples, de-identified, of course, or coming up with your own samples. If you don't know what you're assessing, how will you expect your students to know? They're not going to have no idea.
Yeah, and I think having sample work is so important because sometimes I remember year after year, particularly in the junior science space, writing scientific practical reports was just always, year on year, it was just always a struggle for some students, whether it was like writing an introduction or writing a discussion. But showing students samples of work, I remember one year in particular I showed them, I was like, this is an example of what a high-scoring response would look like. And you could just see their brains ticking over. And then when I asked them, I was like, what surprised you or like what's different? And, they're actually visibly able to see, oh, that's how you use data.
Yeah.
Oh, that's how you link sentences.
Yeah, they notice it.
Yeah.
And you can unpack that and you can make it visible.
Yeah.
I used to love doing that. Same thing, prac reports, but hey, that's our background. But giving them a range of different responses. And then we'd discuss and go, okay, and look, I made them all up.
Yeah.
But we'd look at the responses and we go, okay, which one do you think is the best response and why? And it would be to this question or for this. Which one do you think is the best conclusion and why? And then we'd unpack it. And it was funny because I think with younger students, sometimes there's that misconception that longer is better.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I deliberately made some very long, waffly responses that didn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah.
And then others were a bit more succinct. And, I got a range of different responses from the class. And then we go, okay, well, we've picked which ones we think are better. If I now give you this set of criteria, now which one do you think is the best and why? And the difference was incredible. And then I could start to see a difference in their writing because they knew, okay, when I've got this criteria, this is what I have to do and that's how I do it. We're speaking, I'm actually just very cognizant of the fact that we're speaking from a very math science background. Let's think outside of our topics. Like, what other types of assessments could teachers run? And then how could they sort of build that skill development for them?
Yeah. I know I had a lot of humanities teachers where it would be project work and quite like large tasks, like, for example, putting together a poster. But what they would actually do is they'd get students to submit parts of that summative assessment throughout the term. So after they'd learned a particular skill, they'd give them the opportunity and it would be like, look, this is forming part of your summative assessment, but you're going to hand in, the first comparison on.
So like part A, part B.
Yeah, yeah.
And they get little bits of feedback along the way.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah,
and then
I love
that, created their whole summative assessment.
Yep.
And a lot of humanities teachers I know found that helpful because I know when it comes to humanities or HSIE in particular, you might, not a lot of time is spent in terms of like creating that summative assessment task, but then a lot of time is spent on marking.
Yep.
So that was one way that a lot of my teacher friends would break that down. So then you're not, cramming it all in on the very last minute. Yeah.
Yeah. English, I know there's a lot of like essay writing or creative writing tasks, different types of analytical tasks. I think, again, I'd give really similar advice in terms of like making sure we model the different types of responses and students know what's visible and then making those make the marking criteria really like explicit. I do think that English is a really different one though because everyone has a very different like written voice.
Yeah.
So there are different ways of writing something that can sound very different but are both like completely like valid ways of communicating. So I think like having a range of different samples that sort of communicate that different written voice can be a really nice way to go about things, which is where you might not just want to be the only person writing samples.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
But like you can share with other teachers, or I know that there are some resources online where you can pull those samples from as well. And then, just doing more like collaborative activities as part of your formative assessment in class to get ideas out of students' heads. Yeah.
Love that.
Love ideas.
Love ideas. Love sharing. Love
She's
collaboration.
An ideas woman.
An ideas woman. So I guess like we've spent like a bit of time in the junior space. I know in the senior space, when we're talking about summative assessments, there's much more of a focus, I guess, rather than junior. Like there is still that as well, but authenticating students' work. And it's so important because you need to know that the work that they've produced
is theirs. I think this is relevant no matter what year level. Yeah. How many times have you found plagiarized work, Bez?
All the time. And I love it the most when the font is all different and there's different things highlighted, or there's a word that I genuinely do not understand.
Yeah.
And I have to ask my year 8 student
to explain it to you.
What that word actually means, because I genuinely just don't know.
Yep. Yeah. They're humbling moments, aren't they?
It is. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think this is a cool topic to touch on because of the rise of AI and how that has sort of changed the landscape.
Yeah.
Obviously, plagiarism is something that comes in, but I also think it's really interesting that not all students know like the extent of what classifies as plagiarized work.
Yes. Yeah.
I used to run a class with my year 7s and year 8s on plagiarism. What is plagiarism? And they just think that it's like when you copy something online, it's like a bit of copy paste, which is true. Yes, you've plagiarized that work. You haven't put it into your own words. You haven't said that was the source of, your material. It's not your own idea, blah, blah, blah. But what they didn't realize is that reusing your own work or resubmitting work that you've previously done also classifies as plagiarism. And I love how shook they would be. Like, what? But miss,
that's mine.
What? That's my work. Why can't I use it again? And I was like, because you've already submitted it. Like it's not new. Like you haven't recreated it. If you're going to do it, you have to like reference yourself.
Yeah.
And they were just like, totally shook. And I loved it. But yeah, I think even with senior students sometimes, like the difference between like, okay, I've too closely paraphrased something, that can be real tricky for them. So yeah, how do we navigate that?
I love the example that you've given, actually just explicitly teaching them about it and what it looks like and why it's important to not do it. I've done the same as you. Like if it's a junior class, then it would be a lesson specifically. Because assuming they're younger, so you like have to have that conversation. Whereas with seniors, it would more be a conversation of like just a reminder, blah, 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 blah.
I mean, as long as we've developed those skills from a younger age.
If not, that's what you're relying on.
Yeah, you're kind of relying on that. If you haven't taught them, you can't expect them to know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's still been instances where I have caught seniors plagiarising work and we've had to have some discussions about, okay, can you please explain this to me? I'm not certain that these are your ideas or, this looks really similar to this piece of work and do a side-by-side comparison or students sharing pieces of work across classes is another one that you've got to be mindful of. Gotta love a Google Docs search history.
The things you can find.
The things you can find. Being a teacher is like being a detective sometimes.
It really is.
But yeah, I think just having really candid discussions about that can help people understand the gravity of the situation.
Yes.
And even with juniors, when we went through plagiarism, just going through like, okay, well, it's actually not okay to do that. And you talk about things like intellectual property and like law, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a bit more serious than I first anticipated.
Yeah. A great example to use with students is like music, like showing them. I feel like that's something that's more relatable for them. And they're like, oh, yes, I can understand and I have experienced, in seeing this in my life before as well. But I think what you've said there about it's really important for them to understand the gravity or the consequence of that when they, copy or plagiarise.
Makes them go, oh, that's why we're talking about this.
Yes. Yeah.
The why behind it all.
Always very important.
And also not interested in someone else's ideas. I want their ideas.
Your own ideas.
Yeah. Last but not least, I'm going to circle back.
Ooh,
I know.
a circling back moment.
A circling back moment. I was just thinking, we've talked a lot about like different types of assessments and things, but I kind of want to come back to the core, and that is like the purpose of assessment.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of summative assessment is to get a really accurate evaluation of any learning or growth that has occurred.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure that we're assessing what we want to assess?
I think the first thing you have to ask is, what would you like to assess your students on? Is it a particular skill? Is it a particular, like, a few key knowledge dot points, for example? But also making sure that it is accessible and that they can demonstrate their understanding. That is really important as well.
Yeah. Where would you get that information? Like, what would help you to decide, oh, this is what we're assessing here?
You'd be having a look at the study design, or, for example, you'd be having a look at the syllabus. You'd be having a look at the Oz curriculum, Vic curriculum, whichever one you're using. That is
WA curriculum.
Yeah, that is your benchmark.
Okay.
Yeah.
So curriculum becomes your Bible, your guidebook.
Yes.
Then I think it's about how well have we backwards mapped. And I think if you're coming to the point where you're going, oh, what do we want to assess, and you're at assessment time, you probably haven't backwards mapped. No. But if you're in your planning period and you're planning for the following year, I think it's a good opportunity for you to go, okay, what are the skills and knowledge that we're going to assess at this point in time? Mm-hmm. What are the activities? What are the formative tasks? What's everything that we're doing in the lead up to that?
Yeah.
That's going to help us, have our students acquire and then be able to demonstrate this knowledge or skill.
Yeah. It also helps if you teach, for example, like year 7, year 8, year 9, because you can see like the development of skill or the knowledge, and then that in itself will help you backwards map in a way.
You can see the continuum.
Yeah. Of like, okay, well, if they need this in year 8, then like we need to assess this in year 7, for example, so we can set them up for success in year 8.
Yeah. So yeah, I think my advice would just be like, don't lose sight of what it is that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And even though some tasks might be like super fun and super creative, make it really explicit for your learners that, okay, these are the things that I'm looking for you to demonstrate. Mm-hmm. And make sure that you know what you're assessing and how you're assessing it, and that your learners know that too.
Yes, that is very important.
Yeah. What would your key takeaway be?
Mine would be always have the marking scheme finished beforehand. You'll thank yourself. And I'm going to take something that you said, which I think is excellent, which is backwards mapping for a summative assessment is so important. That is really going to help you think about what's the point of this assessment and what are you and your students going to get out of it as well.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the most important thing in a summative assessment task.
And also, if it's planned, you've kind of done yourself a favour.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's not discount that as a bit of a bonus.
You'll thank your past self.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to Two Friends Who Teach. If you enjoyed listening today and you're not really looking forward to the report writing season, but you found some things helpful, please make sure to like and leave us some comments on our podcast. We really look forward to seeing you
next time.
Bye.
Bye.